When German soldiers first encountered American firepower in World War II, many of them expected an easy fight. They had grown up on years of propaganda, battlefield victories, and stories of European armies collapsing in weeks. The German military machine had overrun Poland, France, the Low Countries, Denmark, Norway, Yugoslavia, and Greece in lightning-fast campaigns. German troops were told the Americans were soft, untested, and more interested in jazz, money, and Hollywood than the brutality of real combat. They expected chaos. They expected panic. They expected to crush a force that had never fought a modern European war. But what they actually saw stunned them. It wasn't the Americans themselves that shocked them first. It was the firepower behind them, the weapons, the machines, the sheer industrial force that the United States had unleashed onto the battlefield. German diaries, letters, and oral testimonies show a recurring theme: disbelief at the scale, the noise, the volume, and the relentlessness of American firepower. Many wrote that it felt less like fighting an army and more like standing in front of a factory that manufactured destruction on demand. For German infantry on the ground, the first shock was the American artillery. They had faced British guns, Soviet rockets, and their own heavy batteries. But the Americans brought something different: coordination, speed, and an almost limitless supply of shells. One German soldier wrote that American artillery fire fell like a steel rain without pause, and another said it was as if the sky itself had turned against us. On the Eastern Front, artillery was powerful but often inaccurate and inconsistent. On the Western Front, the Americans made it systematic. When a German unit was spotted, American forward observers didn't need hours to respond. Sometimes it took minutes, sometimes seconds. German soldiers described opening fire on an American patrol only to be buried under a storm of shells moments later. They said it felt impossible to hide, impossible to reposition, impossible to breathe. A veteran of Normandy said, "You fired one shot and the entire hillside answered." Another shock was the American ability to keep firing. German troops were used to rationing ammunition, fuel, and equipment. They had fought in Russia, where resupply was a nightmare, and in Italy, where Allied air dominance made every movement dangerous. But American forces seemed to have no such problem. German soldiers were stunned to see American machine gunners, with belts of ammunition stacked as high as their shoulders, or Sherman tank crews casually firing round after round as if they had unlimited supply. One German officer noted that American machine guns never seemed to sleep. The Browning .30 and .50 caliber weapons became legendary among German troops. They weren't the fastest firing guns on the battlefield, but they were durable, reliable, and terrifyingly loud. Many German prisoners said the first time they heard the .50 caliber, they thought it was artillery. The weapon ripped through walls, vehicles, and trees with such force that one German described it as the hammer of the giants. Then there were the tanks. German soldiers had been raised on stories of the Panzer Division storming across Europe. They believed their tanks were the finest in the world, and many models were. But when they faced American armor, they encountered something they had never seen before: numbers. Endless numbers. One German tank commander captured in France told his interrogators, "For every one of our tanks, they had 5. And when you destroyed one, 2 more came over the hill." The Sherman wasn't as powerful as the Panther or the Tiger in one-on-one fights, but American firepower wasn't about duels. It was about overwhelming pressure. It was about cutting supply lines, collapsing flanks, and smothering positions under combined arms attacks. German infantry wrote that fighting American tanks felt like facing a flood that never stops rising. And it wasn't just the tanks, it was what came with them: engineers, smoke teams, air support, half-tracks, armored cars, radios everywhere. Coordination Germans had never imagined an enemy could achieve so quickly. American aircraft added another layer of shock. German soldiers had fought the Soviet Air Force, but the Americans brought something that felt industrial: fleets of fighter bombers that circled like hawks. The P-47 Thunderbolt became infamous among German ground troops. Its durability, speed, and firepower made it the monster of the skies. German soldiers said the moment they heard its distinctive engine roar, they hit the dirt and prayed. A German infantryman in Normandy wrote in his diary, "Their planes hunt like wolves. You cannot run. You cannot hide." And this was the part that unnerved German commanders most. The Americans coordinated their firepower better than anyone the Germans had fought before. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was orchestrated. Artillery softened targets, tanks advanced, planes strafed the roads behind. Infantry moved in with machine guns blazing, engineers cleared obstacles, radios linked everything. German troops called it the firepower carpet, a rolling wall of destruction that moved forward yard by yard. One officer said, "It was not courage that defeated us, it was the machine." But the thing that shook German soldiers to their core wasn't just American firepower. It was the speed with which the Americans adapted. When the Americans first entered Tunisia, they were inexperienced. German troops wrote that the U.S. forces were brave but disorganized at Kasserine Pass. The Germans expected the same clumsy mistakes again and again. Instead, they saw something terrifying. The Americans learned fast. German officers wrote after the war that the speed at which the Americans improved was frightening. Their artillery became more accurate. Their tactics became coordinated. Their armor became aggressive. Their infantry became confident. One German general said, "We had underestimated their ability to absorb lessons. They learned in months what took us years." And then came the part that Germans talked about more than anything else: the American logistics system. German soldiers were stunned by the amount of equipment the Americans brought to every battle. Trucks, trains, pipelines, depots, cranes, portable docks, fuel ships, ammunition carriers, repair units, everything an army could possibly need. German units were often starving for supplies. American units were swimming in them. A German soldier captured after the Battle of the Bulge said, "They fight like a factory, not like an army. If they lose a truck, 10 replace it. If they lose a tank, 10 replace it." That wasn't just an exaggeration. That was the reality. American firepower wasn't just guns and explosions. It was a supply chain on wheels. It was the logistical force that allowed constant pressure, constant bombardment, and constant momentum. German soldiers wrote that American forces seemed to be everywhere at once. If you attacked them, you triggered artillery. If you retreated from them, their tanks were already flanking you. If you tried to hide, their planes found you. If you tried to block a road, engineers reopened it in hours. It was a system built for victory, powered by an industrial engine the Germans could never match. But German soldiers also spoke with genuine respect. Many wrote that the Americans fought with a strange mixture of discipline and individual initiative. They noticed that American infantrymen used cover well, communicated constantly, and moved with confidence even when under intense pressure. German officers said American troops lacked the rigid doctrine of German units, but made up for it with creativity and overwhelming firepower. It was a combination the Germans were not prepared to answer. When the Americans broke out of Normandy, when they raced across France, when they pushed through the Ardennes, German troops saw something that contradicted every lie they'd been fed. The Americans were not soft. They were not weak. They were not unprepared. They were, as one German soldier wrote, a storm made of steel and thunder. And the most honest testimony comes from a German officer captured near the Rhine. When asked what he thought of American firepower, he didn't give a speech. He didn't give a technical explanation. He simply said, "We knew the war was over when we saw what they could bring to the battlefield." He wasn't talking about a single weapon. He was talking about the entire American war machine, the artillery that shook the ground, the tanks that kept coming, the planes that never stopped circling, the machine guns that roared through forests, the supply lines that never dried up, and the soldiers who refused to stop pushing forward. German troops had fought the Soviets for years. They had faced the British across deserts and skies. But when they finally stood against the full power of the United States, they realized something they had never truly understood. This was a nation with the manpower, the industry, the resources, and the determination to bury them under sheer force. The shock Germany felt wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. American firepower didn't just break positions. It broke belief. It broke the myth of German superiority. It broke the confidence that had carried the Wehrmacht across continents. And when the German frontline soldiers saw the scale and pressure of American firepower, many quietly admitted something they would never have said in 1941 or 1942. "We cannot stop this." In the end, German soldiers didn't lose because they lacked courage or discipline. Many fought with desperation until the final weeks of the war. They lost because American firepower, combined with American logistics, American industry, and American adaptability, created a battlefield environment the Germans simply couldn't compete with. And for the first time, the men who once believed they were unstoppable realized they were fighting a force even more relentless than themselves. If you want more stories that reveal what soldiers on both sides truly thought during the war, let me know what moment you want broken down next.